Young athletes in Virginia who suffer concussions playing sports would be held out of action under a bill at the General Assembly. The measure would force coaches to bench players who've had severe blows to the head until they're cleared by a health care provider. The bill also requires players and parents to review information on concussions provided by the local school division. The measure has passed the Virginia Senate and is now in the House of Delegates. And joining us now to discuss the issue is the bill's sponsor, State Senator Ralph Northam of Norfolk. He is also a neurologist. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, the NFL implemented a new concussion policy in December. Is this legislation in response to that?
Somewhat, yes, sir, it sure is. You know, they had a study by the University of Michigan looking at retired NFL players, and they saw a higher rate than normal of Alzheimer's disease and other memory problems. They've also had some autopsy reports that have shown changes very similar to those in Alzheimer's, and so it's been rather eye-opening. You know, we also are seeing an increased number of concussions in our junior high and high school players. So all of those factors together, you know, moved us toward this type of legislation.
Well, specifically then, why is the bill needed for high school athletes? You mentioned the increased concussions. What's causing increased concussions at that level?
Well, the athletes, you know, compared to 15, 20 years ago, are certainly a lot faster and stronger. And so the concussions occur from acceleration, deceleration injuries. And despite better equipment, for example, better helmets, we're seeing, you know, more concussions. And so, you know, our legislation is needed for a couple reasons. One is to educate our athletes and their families and the coaches, and then also make sure that it's safe before they return to play.
Now, how would this work? Who could allow the athlete to return to play, and how would they determine that?
Yes, sir. Any any licensed healthcare provider, which includes physicians, also certified athletic trainers, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, those types of healthcare providers. And so we will establish, with a collaborative effort, guidelines for both the schools, and our healthcare providers will use the same and be able to safely determine when these athletes are ready to return to play.
So there's, I guess, a distinction between two things. You've got the same day, should they go back in, or should they sit out, and then later they've got to be evaluated, I guess, further. If they are held out, they've got to be evaluated further along some criteria to come back to play again.
Correct. Any athlete who has sustained a concussion either during practice or in a game will be taken out of competition and not return that day, and then they will be evaluated prior to returning to play.
Now, is there some difficulty there, like you say, an athlete who sustained a concussion? The legislation says suspected of concussion. Sometimes that's very difficult to determine, especially, you know, out there on the field.
Well, you know, it's a gray area. I agree with you sometimes, but it's not that difficult. I mean, these athletes can appear dazed or stunned. They're often confused. They can be forgetting plays, not answering questions slowly. A lot of different things that, you know, are the signs and symptoms of a concussion. So with proper training, I think we'll be able to pick up these athletes that need to sit out.
And with parents and players, I think you've noted that in some sense we have to protect them from themselves because there's such a push to go back in and compete.
There's a tremendous amount of pressure, and I see, you know, athletes that have had concussions, and you know, parents sometimes are pressuring the coaches. Other players on the team would like to see the star athlete back on the field. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure on the coach, and I think this will help protect both the coach and the schools.
All right, State Senator Ralph Northam of Norfolk, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and now let's send it to Mel.